Okay, so we're calling to order the meeting of the Planning Commission, City of Lake Forest Park, Tuesday, November 12th. Would one of the other commissioners care to read our land acknowledgement, please? Any takers?
I can read it.
Thank you.
I just got it pulled up. We'd like to acknowledge we are on the traditional land of a rich and diverse group of Native peoples who have called this area home for more than 10,000 years. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the descendants of these Native peoples who are still here today.
Thank you for that. Hopefully you all have the agenda in front of you. I'd like to ask, are there any proposed changes to the agenda as written? Lots of head shakes. Could I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Agenda is approved. First order of business, approval of meeting minutes from October 8th, regular meeting. Let me ask if there are any comments, corrections on those. I think I found one, but I have to find where it is. Anyone, and can just jump in or raise your hand, either way.
I didn't have any.
Okay, let me just find mine because I had one. Yeah, okay. I am on, let's see, packet page 5. This is regarding old business, middle housing development regulations with SCJ Alliance. And I'm on the paragraph that starts on line 8, which reads, and Ms. Tabert gave a presentation on the middle housing element. The 3 middle housing types chosen were cottage court, accessory dwelling unit, and duplex. I'm not sure what is meant by chosen here. I saw the same words used in the packet for tonight, so I would like to amend that to say chosen as, or chosen as the 3 most supported types of housing from the survey, because I think that's all it was. There has been no choice made that these are the only ones we're going to look at. Right. Does anyone disagree with that statement? I just want to make sure we're being clear that the consultants didn't get to choose our middle housing. It's, and with no offense. All right, thank you. Did you grab that? Okay. Other than that, could I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Second from us, thank you. Okay, approval of minutes from June 11th, and this was tough for me. I'm like, wait, what did we do in June? So, but I'll still put the question out there. Any corrections on that? And I will ask Mark, how is it we forgot to approve these earlier? I'm not really clear, but there we go.
The action minutes are taken by the assistant planner and she wasn't available then moved to the next batch. And so then we stayed current from there, and now we get a reminder from the city clerk, deputy city clerk, hey, on Muni Code, there's a set of minutes missing, and then we go back and fix that.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. Any changes, notes, comments? Okay, could I get a motion to approve the June 11th notes?
I move to approve the June 11
Thank you.
minutes.
Second
I
somewhere?
second.
Thank
I
you.
second.
Okay, that took care of that business. Let me scroll back to my agenda here. I think I'm looking to you, Mark. Meeting dates, draft 2025 Planning Commission meeting dates forthcoming. Anything to say there?
Not for tonight. Yeah, it's just preparation for December. It'll be the standard meetings, and then the discussion like last year around the holidays or any known months or regular occasions that you can't have a quorum.
Okay.
So we'll cover it in December, but begin I know it's early, but begin thinking about your 2025 schedules.
Well, and I don't think any of us would be surprised if in our work to get the middle housing done, we may end up wanting to add extra meetings, possibly. So,
Wait, yeah,
but for now, we'll assume normal.
yeah, we'll establish a regular schedule and you can have a special meeting at any time with notice.
Good. Any questions there? Pretty good? All right. Public hearings, none. Public comments, nobody is here from the public. Next, report from City Council Liaison. Floor is yours.
Good evening, I'm John Lebo. We are making very good progress on the comprehensive plan. And if you'd like, you can track the red lines that we're reviewing. So last week we covered the economic development and transportation sections. So most of the comments that you'll see are relatively minor. There's no substantive changes, and I think it's a tremendous reflection on the valuable work that all of you did in drafting the comp plan. So I think we will get it done this fall and get it approved in time. But if you'd like, again, the red lines for the comments that we were reviewing are posted as part of our agenda packets. So we can take a look at those. And we follow pretty closely to the red lines. There are just a few additional comments. Do you want to make any comments, Director?
The plan is this Thursday to do utilities, capital facilities, and what we're calling parking lot items. And then we're heading, not to jinx it, but we're heading towards a potential public hearing December 2nd. And we can't take action as a city on the document before December 8th, because it's at Department of Commerce, the SEPA, DNS, and so forth, but all those are fully addressed after the 8th. We can hold a meeting at City Council December 12th. And so I don't want to say what's going to happen that night, but it's looking favorable.
Thank you. The other thing to report is that we are in our budget season, so we are getting close to adopting the biennial budget for 25-26. We will be talking about action items perhaps this Thursday, maybe continued discussion where we may actually begin to take some action. A climate project coordinator is still on the budget agenda as a potential hire based upon some revenue enhancements from our garbage utility. Any questions?
I guess I have one question, just having received the survey in the mail. So just in case other residents ask, I'm trying to kind of understand the significance of the survey with respect to the timeline of the budget.
So the survey is to help inform us going forward. We won't have the survey results that were sent out, the questionnaires that were sent out. They'll probably be gathered and analyzed after we pass the budget. And the reason for that is that we're getting pretty close to passing the 25-26 budget. We are using a portion of our unallocated reserves, recognizing that in our current state, expenditures are exceeding our revenue. So the survey is intended to help inform us as a path forward. We just recently hired a consultant, Liz Loomis, to help us with a potential levy lift. And that would be forthcoming in discussion in 2025 as to whether we wish to go to the voters and ask for a levy lift on the property tax to help fund city services.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All
No.
right.
I appreciate you guys sending it out. John, it's I hope we learn a lot and that it gets shared with the public in a timely fashion.
It'll probably be after the new year. Most likely. But they may be able to tabulate the results pretty quick. So
That would be nice to put in one of the city newsletters, you know, for people who did take the time to fill it out. It was pretty lengthy and it didn't say anything about when you might expect the response.
that's a very good suggestion. We definitely want to do that. we don't want people to fill out these surveys and not see the results.
And I'll acknowledge it's entirely possible that it explained on the survey that this is forward looking and I just jumped to the questions.
It
So,
did not.
okay, okay, so, but just for the record, it's good to know. This is for thinking about how we fix things in the coming year.
Yes.
It also didn't say if it was anonymous, and it doesn't appear that it is if you mail it in or if you use your special QR code. So I'm curious to see how many people respond if it's not anonymous.
Should be anonymous. The results should go to our consultant, and there's no reason for us to know who responded with what. So we always want to get good responses, and if people are concerned that somehow their responses will come back to them, that's not good.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for our council liaison? All right, then. We're on to old business, middle housing development regulations with SCEJ. So Zoe, I'm handing it to you here. Unless Mark, you have any opening comments?
No,
Okay.
so it's presentation.
All right.
Great. I'll share my screen. I can get that going for y'all. All right. Sweet. Thank you all for having me this evening. I'm gonna give a little bit of a middle housing update for y'all. The first couple of slides are gonna be a bit of a repeat from what you saw last month, but then we'll get into more of the specifics as we go. So Lake Forest Park, this says Tier C. It's really Tier 3 city, surrounded by other Tier 3 cities, Tier 2s, and Tier 1s. All of these different tiers have to do with what under the middle housing legislation we have to plan for the allowance of, at least with the new regulations. And these are the 9 middle housing types. So we have not chosen those 3 as stated earlier. It's from this list of what the state qualifies as middle housing, which they say is buildings that are compatible in scale, form, and character with single family. The cities are required to allow for a select portion based on their population size. So I'm going to mention it probably a couple times throughout this presentation, but really it's 2 units per lot. And so whatever of these configurations allow for 2 units per lot, that's what must be allowed for. And anything else is an additional policy decision that the city can choose to do. This most specific thing to remember in this new legislation is that these regulations cannot be more restrictive than those for detached single-family residences. We can encourage middle housing over single-family, but it cannot be more restrictive in that way. So it's kind of a highlight overview of all of it. And then as part of your packet materials, we developed a Tier 3 housing memo to help sort through all the different aspects of the middle housing legislation, as well as other housing legislation that came down the pipeline in the last 2 sessions. So it includes things you've already seen before and have had to deal with for your housing element in your comp plan, like HB 1220. Goes into a bit of 1337, which is with the ADUs and how that interacts, as well as things with your permitting processes. We've included this memo mainly because when it came to middle housing and ADUs specifically, the guidance that's been coming out from the state has been updated frequently, and it actually was updated in the timeline between when I last spoke with y'all and now. So we just went back to the drawing board of what is within the specific policy and how do we work with it, establish the floor, and move forward. And the major takeaways with this is the at least 2 units per lot, referred to as unit density, applying the same development permit and environmental review process for middle housing as applied to detached single-family residences. And then there's stuff within the middle housing legislation, HB 1110 and 2321, that specifically states that cities are not required to allow more ADUs or middle housing types beyond the density requirements of 2 units per lot. So that's the floor for tier 3. We can go above, we can stay at that baseline. That's where the choices are made. And then cities may also adopt a maximum unit density if they wish. And ADUs may count towards unit density as well. These mays really go to whatever direction you all feel is right and what is heard through the public engagement process and that side of things. Those are the choices to be made. And my next slide is on the how ADUs in 1337 interact with this, because I know that was a piece that folks were interested in the last time we talked, but I did want to give a little bit of a pause right now if you would like me to go through what was in the tier 3 housing memo specifically on like the must, the mays, exemptions, anything there first. Yes. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, thank you. I wondered, I think this is pretty clear. We don't have to allow any more than 2 per, which I'll just say straight away, I think we should only do what's required because the rest can be incentives to get the kinds of housing that we really want in our community. But I wondered if it spoke at all about this mechanism, 2 pieces about ADUs being sold. Like right now, we can't sell an ADU, but would you be able to sell an ADU if you had your primary house and an ADU in your backyard, whatever, wherever it's located? I don't know why I'm putting constraints on it. Can you sell an ADU that's attached or detached? And also, did it give any guidance on the property itself? So this isn't subdividing the underlying parcel. Does it mean that we'll have to have some sort of something in our code that mandates anybody has to take on whatever the mechanism is to like create a condo or a like whatever, since the underlying land would belong to everybody on the property? Or would they like would they effectively be able to subdivide the property? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so on that aspect, and this is an area that's newer for me to learn, so I will be coming back with more information and specifics on this, but from what I've heard so far is that there is like I don't want to say push or anything like that, but it can be owned as condominiums as the process of it, of like, okay, partial ownership, I mean, not partial ownership of each unit separately. They can be sold. And I need to get into the exact language to know it better, but it was a piece on like the condominiumization of them. So it's that, apologies if it's a rough explanation. But that, yes, it's the same parcel, but the units can be bought and sold separately, sort of thing.
So the ADU technically, or DADU, could be sold, and TBD exactly the mechanism for underlying. I guess part of the underpinning of that is, if we can put a pin in this, Yanni, is that we will have to better understand how code dictates or informs that, so it's a known going in. If I, for example, have a home and a DADU and I say, whoa, wait, I want to sell this DADU to my friend, you know, what am I going to have to do as the person who currently owns all of it to make it ready for that? And then the other piece of that, Mark, I don't know our oversight with DADUs and ADUs. I know there are many that are not like sanctioned or approved, like whatever, like will existing ADUs have to go through any sort of verification that they are considered a safe and to code structure?
Yes.
I just questions, yeah, like,
The short
so if
answer,
I want, yes, okay,
the short answer on that last part is they could physically be out there now. They will need permits, building permit, etc. They'll be subject to the planning regulations in place at that moment. They They technically may be on the site, but they do not exist.
Right. So if I came to you and I said, I have a DADU I put in a long, long time ago, I'm not going to tell you when, and no, it was never permitted or anything like that. But I want to sell it now. I think, again, we don't have to discuss this now. I just want to capture that this, Zoe, might be some additional minutia that we need help with
Yeah.
because I could see that being a possibility.
And there's several other questions as well. It's like once an ADU, let's say, is sold, then what does that mean in the future? Can that ADU be torn down and something else built there? I mean,
I think the way to look at it now is we dive into what the minimum mandates will be and what the legislative wording is we had our state conference 3 weeks ago, and an attorney from Pierce County came in. You can condomize anything in Washington right now. And it was a mind blower for many of us because we looked at condominiums as a housing type. And it's not, it's ownership. And so his take was, there's a lot to convey in a short period of time, but picture it as an ownership, and you could make it an ownership agreement for anything. You can condominiumize a garage. But in this context, they will have to form an HOA. They will become units. They can be separately owned, whether it's unit, lot subdivision, or the condominiumization. We will have to update our code to not prohibit it, but that those regulations are already in place. Coming from California and Idaho, condominium was a housing type. So it's an eye opener to come to Washington, and the underlying ownership regulation is obviously different. I'm waiting for the notes and the materials from APA Washington to come out and then follow up on that track. But we could pursue 1337 right now.
Yeah, some of our small local airports are condominiums in terms of owning the hangars. So yeah, that makes sense.
I also want to just flag this, Zoe, because it might also require some research. But when we went through our ADU code in the last couple of years, we approved the ability for a single family house to have a DADU and an ADU, provided they had the space and had the right canopy coverage, pervious surface requirements, setbacks, etc. And so currently on our code, a property owner has the legal ability to build 2 ADUs, which means then technically could they sell 2? I appreciate, I looked at your materials beforehand and I was like, okay, great. A bunch of really important questions got answered, but then it led to like 20 more. And so I just want to make sure that we have a full understanding of the scope of what we're going to need to tackle in the code.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, I'm glad I was able to answer some of the questions with it.
Yeah, totally.
But I also know that means, okay, there's room for more now.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
I have written down notes, and so I will be getting back on these pieces as well, just because I know this has been an area that's been floating in the back of my mind with the ownership aspects that I haven't had the time to do the research on yet. But glad we're starting here and then I can look into it further. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which does address 1337 and what it means for middle housing, because it is funky in how it's done. And what I mean by that is that there's a policy decision that can be made here with how Lake Forest Parks wants to approach that aspect of unit density. And that what the baseline floor for what the state is saying, despite with 1337 saying 2 ADUs per lot for the allowance of, with the like middle housing HB 1110 and 2321 kind of being on the same side of saying what you must allow for on a lot, state guidance has tried to mitigate the language weird interpretation between the two by saying either allowing for, actually you must approach either the way of 1 single family unit with 2 ADUs, or you can go the route of like a duplex, for example, and that would be counting an ADU as part of the unit density. You can and may make the decision to go beyond that and do a duplex of the 2 units per lot and an extra ADU, or the duplex and 2 ADUs. That's the may of a policy decision versus the requirement that they've kind of settled on between a whole bunch of different policies on this of going single family and 2 ADUs, and also doing duplex, but no ADUs as like the bare floor for this. This is not written within the state legislation itself. It is a policy interpretation of where folks can take it from here. And that is something we've had to sit with for a while now on trying to figure out. Yes, I see the hand raise. I was really expecting ones on this.
I'll wait
Go
to
for it.
see if other
Yeah.
commissioners want to jump in first, since I've been blabbering a lot.
Anyone else? Okay,
I wanted to ask, again, doesn't need to be answered today, but I can see on the left is what we have to do, on the right is what we might want to do.
Mhm.
On the left, if this is what we have to do, it goes back to that ownership question. Can that primary residence sell both of those ADUs?
And then
Thank-
any other side issues, like if you have single family home with 2 ADUs, but they're not condominiumized, are we still in compliance with 1110? Just physically having an ADU on site, does that meet our density requirements?
I would say yes to that, because it just goes to you have to allow for this. It doesn't mean even you have to build it, you have to have the ownership models in place or anything. It's just going down to what can somebody come in and develop.
As we move through this, are we keeping track of things that come up that like are existing code that we need to update versus new code we need to implement?
That
The item, we got the gap analysis and then the draft language, and these videos will help.
Okay, so do I bring an idea up, or do I need to make a note and just wait for the moment we're actually in that part of the code to say it?
Whenever you like, it's never too soon.
Okay, well, I just want us to review what I think at some point we need to look at our ADU code and make sure it continues to be, we wrote it with the interest in moving these issues along, but now that they're being imposed upon us, I want us to just review our ADU code to make sure that it's compatible with these new requirements. And it may be that it has to be modified or pulled back a little bit. I feel really strongly that the way we're going to get affordability and the type of housing we want to diversify it is to be able to use anything beyond what we have to do as an incentive. And then the second piece, I want us to look at since all housing has to follow the same sort of pervious surface requirements, setbacks, height, and so on, that we look at in particular our setback rules and consider modifying them. In particular, we don't have any limitation for how many linear feet you can run down a neighbor's fence line at 5 feet from their fence. And so with a lot of these structures being long and tall, it may be more friendly for adjacent homes for us to consider either step backs on a second story or to limit the number of linear feet you can run on a property line at that 5 feet distance. So I do want to make sure that we don't miss that opportunity to clean up or update our side yard setbacks. Thanks.
awesome. Thank you.
okay, other commissioners, anything else? Otherwise, I'll say let's keep moving and we can collect more questions as we go.
Sounds good. I'm gonna now kind of show the housing configurations that go towards that 2 units per lot aspect, as well as that interaction with the 1337 bill. So for a tier 3 city, the housing configurations that must be allowed for are the single family residence and 2 ADUs, duplex, stacked flats, cottage housing, and courtyard apartments. And the reasoning for these types, specifically in the naming, I think with the courtyard apartments and the cottage housing, is that the Department of Commerce has stated that these all can be reasonably built in a 2-unit per lot configuration. And so that's why those are requirements by right from them of like, you have to include it in your definitions. It's something we're looking at as the requirements, and has been the back and forth with their guidance of going from saying you're required to do 4 housing types to 2 units per lot. This is just clearing that up a bit.
So can I just to clarify, what
Yeah.
they're saying is that cottage housing doesn't necessarily mean any higher density requirement. They're saying that you can do it at 2 per, therefore we have to allow it.
Yep, exactly. Yes,
Really,
Melissa.
the point of it is that there's some shared open space typically. Okay.
Yeah.
Melissa, you're next. Thank you.
I'm just curious about the stacked flats, I guess. And so if we're allowing this per lot, I mean, is there some sort of outline in terms of like density? I mean, I know there's like housing density per lot, but in a stacked flat, like that's not saying like how many units are going to be in that stacked flat. Is that correct?
So in the following slides, I do have some depictions of what they mean by each of these based on the definitions that they have.
Okay.
So the state has given a definition for a stacked flat, but for the sake of being a city that has to do 2 units per lot, think of it as just a duplex that's 1 unit, like stacked on top. It's all the different configurations for how you can arrange 2 units on a lot.
Okay.
Which that's where the names get kind of confusing for folks, because it's like, wait a minute, stack flats, couldn't that be so many different bedrooms? And it's like, no, it's just the configurations themselves. So
Great, thank you.
that's the bit. It's like, okay. And I do have some quick photos and graphics that we've worked on to try to explain this concept. So I'll go into that. Folks are ready for it.
Yep.
Okay. Seeing so. Actually, before I do, I forgot I had this other slide. These were the housing types that from the public engagement results that folks were most in line with. So the cottage housing, courtyard apartments, and duplex, but not that stacked flats comment. So now into the drawings. So this is an example of what it would essentially look like, or could look like, with single family and 2 duplexes. This is just if the duplexes are attached. And it would rely on 1337 for the specifics of that. With duplex itself, the definition of duplex is not provided by the state. So it is on the city to determine what that means for the specifics in Lake Forest Park. But typically just 2 units per lot. How specific you get with it can be open. And then in this example, it's just kind of showing what it could look like if a duplex was also on the same lot as, if an ADU was on the same lot as a duplex, sort of thing, but just the 2 doors side by side for the main unit. For the courtyard apartments, the definition is provided by the state, where they say it's an attached dwelling units arranged on 2 or 3 sides of a yard or court. Again, ADU could be allowed in this situation depending on whether it counts towards unit density. And this can be shaped either as an L or as a U. Just having that courtyard in between is really what they're thinking about. With cottage housing, the difference here is that they're 2 detached units with an open space that is owned in common, and it can also, as an aside, has units owned as condominium units with property owned in common, and a minimum of 20% of the lot has open space. And then, of course, what it would look like with an ADU on the side is a may. And then this is the stack flats. So the shaded area is a separate unit from the top unit. And the definition here is that dwelling units in a residential building of no more than 3 stories on a residential zoned lot in which each floor may be rented, separately rented or owned. So it's just the divide there. You can have the doors side by side and one leads upstairs, one leads downstairs, but 2 units just arranged on top of each other. Oh, I do have the next step, says I'll pause for the graphics before going to my next slide. How are folks feeling?
One of the questions at our housing forum
Mhm.
was speculative. Where are we going to be at next fall? And the curiosity was, if we go duplex and keep a lot of existing code, would each of those units get an attached or detached dwelling unit? Obviously, if we go the route of minimums, that's not the case because of the clarification. But if that, and we're supposed to have a broad discussion as part of this. And then your comment about incentives, I just want to make sure that the thought is that we're talking about it with this effort between now and June. So if we go with the minimums and we talk incentives like deed restricted, but allow a second ADU with a duplex and so forth, that your intent is to investigate those now, as opposed to a separate effort after we are compliant with 1110. Because the reason I say this, we could be consistent and compliant with all of this legislation, and it's all designed to be market rate. Different sizes, etc., different rents, different ownership prices, but all market rate. And so one thing they left out, one of the criticisms, is that it doesn't actually deal with affordable housing at the lower levels, and that's where the incentives come in. And so if the city wants to go there as part of this effort, we can have that broad discussion, meet the minimum mandates, and then include incentives, deed restriction, income range, and so forth.
So I guess the question for you, Maddie, is are you, how do you see that playing out? Is it do what
Okay.
we do now and then incentives later, or get the incentives all dialed in also before June?
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure if Mark was addressing Zoe or me. I mean, I think if we can tackle it, I think we're going to need Zoe's, support, and we may even need support from our attorney to better, understand how some of these things function. I mean, we're just starting this conversation, but if time and resources were a limiting factor, I think we need to be compliant, so we don't have to just accept I don't think our staff is big enough, or our town is ready to have somebody else impose code on us. So if we can get it all done at once, Yanni, I think great, if we can get those resources. But if we need to focus on getting the minimum into code by June, let's get that done and immediately start working on really smart incentives that give us a variety of options. I think that when we look at the housing study, we have a real issue with having enough smaller units in our community. And so like cottage housing, I was actually glad to see that they weren't just talking about duplexes, that middle housing piece acknowledged these different types. And I think in many cases, we have a real opportunity. Pardon me from going on. Let me just tell you what my assumption is based on what we've seen in our neighboring communities. 3-story duplexes are like fast, cheap. People have plans, they know how to get it done, and with the best possible margin, right? But if we say, hey, you can build 2 3-story townhomes, which is effectively what they're going to be able to do, or you can build 5 cottage houses, like there could be, or the Quimper Village, example that we've talked about, there could be some opportunities to really incentivize builders, who are primarily the only ones doing new construction in our community, to build that. And I think that's all I meant, Yanni. Is like, let's incentivize these smaller homes, smaller footprints, since it's priced for rent or for sale on a square footage basis. And I guess just back to where I started, if we can get that done before June, great, but if not, let's get the bare minimum done and then circle back to it, and be really creative. So we get the output we want.
No, I like that. Thank you. And I agree. I think there's some real opportunities. Melissa?
So I'm just sort of, maybe I'm just thinking out loud here because, back when we were doing the zoning, looking at all the different zoning issues and we were looking at parking. And when I look at these different options, I know, there's been like lots of changes since then, now if you're within a certain distance from public transit, you don't have to have like, additional parking spots and that sort of thing. But now we're looking at like putting 4 housing units on a lot. And I guess my concern still goes back to where are all those cars going to be parked? And maybe there's no way to address that right now. Maybe it's just something that, can be thought about in the future, but the fact of the matter is people will still have cars. Even people who use public transit will still have cars. They're gonna have to get parked somewhere. We have no good parking around here. We don't, we have streets and no sidewalks. And so it's just, I look at this and I go like, oh, that could be a big mess in the future if we don't think about how that might look. If you have a lot and you have 2 main houses with 2 accessory dwelling units, in theory, there's like 4 different households and then no parking. And then how many of those can we actually absorb?
I suspect we're going to have a very robust conversation around parking because Melissa, I share your concerns, but I know there are people who feel very strongly that it's, like a problem to require parking. So it is part of the code that we'll be having discussions about when we get to that point.
I will say in the state requirements real quick for middle housing is that, yeah, you cannot require off-street parking as part of this for the, as a condition on middle housing within major transit stop. And then there's a couple other specifics for it as well.
Yeah.
But
Most of those communities though, that they're talking about, they have sidewalks and we don't.
Yeah.
We have we just don't have safe places for people to walk. Even with public transit, my son takes the link home and he gets dropped off across the street from LFP, from the elementary school. And the closest crosswalk, he has to actually double back and go back over by the school, or he's looking at going down to the town center. I live off the 40th place. Zoe, you probably aren't familiar with that, but it's where that big roundabout is supposed to be here at some point. There's just no, it creates a safety issue. I feel like, yeah.
So let's keep moving and hopefully we'll have some time at the end too to maybe collect some of these kind of lingering questions and ideas, but let's keep going with the presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, so the next steps that we have prepped for y'all is to really work on those graphics a bit more to tailor them specifically for like Forest Park to see what that all looks like with lot sizes in the area, as well as having it be a tool for informing the public on changes, as well as working on the gap analysis and getting that all to you guys to show where changes are getting edited in the codes for specifics, working on the community engagement a little more and figuring out what's already been done, because I know middle housing was included as the comp plan process, like within it. And then updating the development code for those definitions, use charts, standards, all that stuff is coming down the pipeline for us. But that is what I have for y'all. I'm gonna stop sharing right now.
Thank you, Zoe.
So I'm hearing we have our work cut out for us is the main thing. That was really helpful. I think you heard a bunch of questions, so we're gonna, look forward to our next session with you to see if some of those have been solved for us, and then we'll have a bunch of new ones.
Awesome. I'm here for it.
Anyone on screen have questions or thoughts to sort of bring up now? David.
Just thinking about some of the other considerations to consider in regards to infrastructure, increased traffic, environmental impacts. For me, it just brings up all kinds of questions. Not like that, not to stop the process, right? But how do we mitigate some of those impacts that these changes will cause in our city?
That sounds good. Yeah, it's a tough thing to try to figure out before it already happens too, is the thing. So I've written those down.
So I think it was, Zoe, in your memo or somewhere, you did point out to some exemptions and things. So some of those were, as I recall, there was one having to do with lots that are not on sewer, that we could choose to not allow middle housing if a lot is not connected to sewer. Wasn't that in?
Yes. So other codes still like apply to the same process if the capacity isn't there for services for the increased density. That still is part of the review of knowing whether or not that service is capable to support such units. That goes into the feasibility for each developer when they're coming in as well. So things like fire codes as well still apply in this case, accounting for that, electrical. Yeah. And the critical areas exemption is within RCWs that portions of a lot, parcel, or tract designated with critical areas or their buffers can basically exempt middle housing from being developed there instead. So
I think David, or was that it? Did you have a follow-up to that first question? Or is your hand just still up?
Oh, sorry, my hand's still up.
Okay, then Maddie.
gotcha.
I want to make a pitch also that that the critical areas, I know Yanni, there had been some discussion about this before, but again, I think it falls into like, we don't have to, and so therefore we shouldn't, and keep that again as another incentive. We could code for those lots, that have some buildable area, maybe appropriate for cottage housing or ADUs or, things like that. So I want to just say again, I'm not opposed to this. I just want to use all of those things that we don't have to do as incentives. So.
I appreciate that comment. I'm attracted to the sentiment of it. We've talked about some of the possible incentives in the past, but that's an interesting way to look at it. Thank you. Any other questions?
How are we going to get started on this? Like, what sort of systems or structures will you use to help us start to figure out like the work that needs to happen with existing code, where we need to fill in, and then to David's point, where there may be important touch points that we consider downstream? I mean, literal and figurative downstream impacts of any particular code revision.
Yeah, so the first step really in all of this is the gap analysis to see where current code and state requirements need editing. And that's what we'll be presenting with you all at the next meeting to really show where changes would be needed just for the baseline requirements with definitions, things to add. We'll also have a companion Word document that supports the gap analysis, showing where edits are getting made and where there's opportunities for more wordsmithing within it. And essentially it goes from there, within deciding, okay, once we have the floor of the requirements from the state, what do y'all want to tweak specifically within the gaps that we've looked at? What sections of code have we not addressed that you would like us to see reviewed as part of this process? And then what edits have been made, how they've been made, what would you still like to see? It's kind of that like check-in process throughout, but really starts with the gap analysis. Any additional questions on that piece or any others?
Well, I can tell you, I'm after, inspired by Maddie's comments, I'm thinking of all kinds of permutations for things that we're gonna need to answer. Like, let's say you have someone who has in fact legally developed two ADUs. And if we choose not to allow a duplex plus two ADUs, are we gonna allow any kind of grandfathering, or is the only way they could do a duplex is to tear out those ADUs? Right, so like, what do we do with, do we deny that option essentially? And only by way of, tearing something out, which, that might be a sound investment decision if we're not gonna allow those ADUs to stay and do the duplex. So just, and I'm not asking for an answer for what's right, I'm just pointing
Mhm.
out that there's some interesting permutations that we're gonna have to think through.
Yeah, I think we're gonna be seeing more of that once we get into more specifics on seeing what's in current code. And versus like where the state's coming from with things. So that'll for sure be an upcoming conversation, most likely at next one, if not the meeting after.
Probably an edge case, but for the handful of folks here in our community that I know have been operating before, we updated our ADU code, a home with, multiple living units in it. I guess I wonder how the city is going to deal with that. Again, we don't have to discuss it here, and it is probably an edge case, but it's something we're going to have to be prepared to grapple with. And that leads me to another question that I kind of broached earlier. But what is the process for preparing your property for condoization? Could I pay an attorney? Like, are there rules within the code I have to follow, or do I have to pay an attorney to do it? And then what legally allows it to happen? Can I just go do it with an attorney right now and separate from the city? I'm just trying to figure out how all of those entities will work together to, basically ensure that our planning and the intent of our code is honored.
Yeah, the impression I have from this attorney is that's their meat and potatoes right now. They do this day and night.
Yeah.
But I work for the city, so I also know that whatever you do on your property, you need to meet codes. So if the city code says that the primary dwelling unit has to be owner occupied, and you can have an ADU and you can rent it out, and it prohibits selling it, you need to meet that. But that doesn't invalidate state code for condominiumization. So if they are in line with city code and they walk down to this attorney and they want to condominiumize it right now, they do not need anything from the city at all.
So could they sell? Could somebody right now sell their ADU?
No, because our current city code does not expressly permit that.
How would we know if they had or hadn't?
If your question is, are there ADUs out there that are separately owned? Maybe. Would they meet current code? No. It's in the title. It's an accessory unit. It's accessory to a primary use in a single family zone. So with these changes, we'll address those scenarios. And what that attorney that spoke to us said is that separate process for ownership can happen now and it can happen then. And he does that, but he's also smart and he knows that they need to comply with local codes, regulations, and so forth. So, but that doesn't mean they don't exist out there. They wouldn't be legal.
Right, because you have to file too with the county, I would guess too, right?
Yeah. Essentially county recorder, taxes, assessor, all that.
Right. Oh gosh, that's a whole nother bag of worms. The county will have a different.
We wouldn't see it. We wouldn't see it at all. It's even more removed than a short plat. It doesn't involve a city signature at all.
Interesting.
But yes, it could. We'll have to address it.
Yeah, those are the things that I know I have zero expertise in. I can come up with some questions, but boy, we're gonna have to be really leaning into some smart people that have this background expertise because it's going to affect how we frame the code revisions we recommend to council. And yeah, so whatever you can do to help us, Zoe, would be really great.
Melissa,
Sounds good.
Are we considering limiting the number of short-term rentals we're gonna allow permits for?
Staff's trying to keep their mouth shut. We have not heard a directive of that sort at any time this year.
Nobody's concerned about that?
I trying not to answer that question.
Okay.
On this call, are you looking to see if you have any fellow commissioners who want to see limited short-term rentals? Is that your question, Melissa?
I guess, you know, as we're looking at increasing housing, you know, it one of the things that sort of works against increasing housing is short-term rentals. That doesn't help get people in houses. And so if we were able to cap those short-term rental permits, then that would open up the pool of rental housing.
well, we don't require permits now in the city, so
Oh, there's no permit requirement for,
Like a
I-
business license, which I think that they should pay business tax on that, and in our community, they're
Oh,
operating a
you pay
business.
taxes. You pay tax, I mean, I have one, right? So I pay hotel and lodging tax and sales tax on every transaction. But the city of Lake Forest Park does not require a permit. I called when I started, I'm like, do I need a permit? Nope, you sure don't? Okay. I don't.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. This isn't against you, Yanni, but to Melissa's point, it's another mechanism that you could, it is a business that's being run in LFP, so LFP could get, like my husband pays taxes to LFP on his consultancy because he runs it here. It's a business in our home, well, in the studio. And you know, that's something that we could put in place if we as a city weren't willing to say, you know, no short-term rentals, you know, we could at least have them registered as businesses. And I know at least the one that used to be near our house, I felt terrible for the immediate neighbors. They were running weddings there most weekends during all the good weather months. So there was never a time that the street wasn't up and down this, you know, parking and music until the maximum hour, which was 10 o'clock, and drunk guests, you know, traipsing around the neighborhood. And so I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's probably a fairly small problem in our community, but it's a good point, Melissa.
okay. And I'm not just, you know, like I'm not anti short-term rental, like in general. I'm just saying, you know, in terms of if we're trying to get people in houses, you know, opening it up for short-term rentals kind of doesn't help that. So if we're creating more housing, but it's going towards something else that's not actually getting a family or a resident in that home.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I read a lot about this issue because I do have one. Mine happens to be an attached studio, like we share a wall. So there's no parties, no weddings at my place. But like I've said it before in this setting, I have no objection to getting a permit or a license from the city if they want to have it, and I'll pay for it. That's fine, but they don't require that. I do not think, though, that it is well, under current code, I don't think it's a big issue. There are about 36 active short-term rentals in the city. And that's from me doing my own market research to understand who else is doing this, right? So it's really not that's not a big number as I see it. And like for mine, I would never rent that as a dwelling for somebody permanently. So it because of the configuration, it's not set up to be a standalone unit. I want to be able to use it for my relatives, you know, like that's just off the table for me. So, you know, it works for me, but I would never rent or sell that because it's not set up for that. So anyway, not to get sidetracked, but sorry, we have a question from Councilmember or comment.
So there was an ask, as the council talked about limiting short-term rental. And there was a brief conversation about it, and it was in the context of if we're trying to increase housing, do short-term rentals work against that? And so it was a discussion, no action was taken, but there will, I'm sure, be further consideration of this. So there was sentiment that maybe we should look at that.
Yeah, I've read about this all around the country and even other parts of the world, and I think this is a very real issue in destination towns. Okay, and no insult to the city, we're not a destination town. There's not like a thing that draws masses of people here in a certain season. Very different for a, town on the San Juan Islands, Ocean Beach in San Diego, Leavenworth, that are magnets. We're nicely located, we're not a magnet. So I just don't see it being that big of an issue here. That could change if this code triggers a lot more people saying, okay, we're gonna do more of this, then I think that's a very, very relevant question to ask. So, or could be more so. I'll say that.
And staff's comment is more along the lines of it takes resources and staff doesn't drive policy. We are directed by the council. And so that's the hesitancy of that issue being picked up by staff. We need to be told to do that. It's no easy issue by any means, and often does not get resolved.
Maddie.
Yeah, I wanted to say that to your point about like you would never, sell or whatever your side thing. I think another thing that we're going to have to grapple with as we figure out all these use cases and sort of use them as a litmus test for like, well, what are all the upsides and pitfalls of this choice or that choice, and being able to play out these scenarios, I think is helpful. So in that spirit, Yanni, since they're taking away the residency requirement on these units, there's certainly a fine possibility that somebody would buy your place and feel just fine about, having a long-term renter or whatever, or, I'm thinking that we have to put it through that lens now, because if it can be sold, we just would have to make sure it is actually a viable unit as a community, so that we don't have, people like getting their money and running and then leaving somebody with an unsafe space, or, all the things that the planning, our code is supposed to ensure. So it feels daunting. I feel like I just keep coming up with questions that I don't have any idea about. And, but there are things that we're going to have to like address, or we could be, unleashing something that would be really hard to reel back in.
Totally agreed. And what I mean specifically and I know there are others like mine, so I'm kind of generalizing a little bit. Like, it's not actually it couldn't be a standalone unit as it is now. It would take probably $60,000-$70,000 of remodel and utilities and things to actually make it what would be a code compliant residential unit. Right now it's not. There's only a kitchenette and it doesn't have like everything you would need. So that's all I'm saying is, for me, it kind of doesn't apply right now. You're absolutely right that a future owner of my property could spend that $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, make it a true second unit, and then by the new rules sell it or keep renting it as short term. So I totally acknowledge that. It's just not relevant to me in my thinking, because that's not where we're gonna go. Well, I live here, so. Great.
So I just want to say that I know quite a few family that have their children living with them, as and they're not counted as part of the community, because they've gone away to college and then now they've come back and they're living with their parents, and they may be in the garage or they may be downstairs, or and so these and they may have a spouse, but they're not counted as part of the extra people that we have here. So there's that scenario too that's going on. And like what you're saying is that it wouldn't be like a standalone. They don't have like their own kitchen or their own bathroom. Well, they may have the bathroom, but they don't have like a kitchen or a laundry room or that type of stuff. But they are definitely here, and they're part of our community, but they're not getting counted. So I don't know how we count those people too.
Plenty of interesting stuff. Zoe's got her work cut out.
I was gonna say, I definitely wrote notes down on that one because I know I've heard that before from a different group, and it goes down to some of, well, are we separating this existing house into like having two addresses now, or are we keeping it the same? And it gets into a funky gray area for sure with that. Yep.
So I think we might be reaching the end of this segment for tonight with lots to think about. Are we prepared to let Zoe go and we move on? Just one final check for questions. Okay, Zoe, thanks so much for your time and appreciate the discussion.
Thank you all. See ya.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we have we had the parking lot items as our next old business for future meetings. As I was looking through my notes from last time, and last time I was, I think, the only one on screen and everybody else was here. So I think you all are avoiding me actually. That when I'm here, you choose to be on screen. I'll try not to take it personally. But if I interpreted some of what happened on this board, oh, they're still here. That's perfect. We felt like there were certain of the parking lot items that we probably wanted to not delay too long because they're pretty related to housing, the comp plan, middle housing. Like we had some questions that related to reasonable use exemptions and things like that, and that's on our list. But I'm not entirely clear, Mark, and so I'm gonna look to you, what you wanted to do tonight with these. I'm not sure we completely landed that conversation last time. And I'm also cognizant that we have barely a majority of our commission here, so I'm just a little unsure about how to make good use of our time tonight on this list.
But staff's intention is to leave that there until they need the board. We have a photo of it. We have it in our notes. It's on the agenda tonight, mostly in case you had any questions or additions. But no intent to do anything on it tonight if you don't want to. This was kind of a transition meeting, nothing urgent. The next opportunity for this list is your work plan, which we'll do December and January and bring that to City Council. The major parts of that you already know, and it's reflected on this timeline. So it's not a big ask in December and January, but we have opportunity to focus on other things as time allows in 2025.
I guess one thing I would say, just building off of tonight's discussion, we might add for now, at least as a placeholder, talking about incentives for middle housing, because if we decide that we don't have time to really work up incentives in an effort to just get what we must do done, then that would probably be one of our top priority things to do next, is my guess. I don't know if others feel differently, but that seems like one we need to keep in mind as something that might bump other things further back. Maddie.
One thing that's missing from this list, if I took this list to mean the what is going to be in our work plan for next year. And, you know, because I think all of these things plus the work we have are more than we can do in a given year. And so I guess I would want to have some conversation about, since it's November and then we just have December left, uh, what in this list makes it to our work plan next year, and have that kind of laid out monthly, because we do have, we've done that before where we think of percentage of time spent, but it sounds like we could keep ourselves very busy with code that brings us into compliance on middle housing. And then we could easily spend the second half of the year working on incentive programs, right? So, you know, or pre-approved designs for ADUs and, you know, so many things associated with that. So I'd love to have a conversation about what we feel like we absolutely have to get done, and then which handful of these things we might be able to pick up, particularly given the city's, you know, budget challenges. Anything that would require more expertise on this list might be hard to fit in this next calendar year.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was kind of heading and saying that some of these topics have a really strong nexus to things we're already working on this year for sure. So I guess I would feel like those are the ones that move to the front of the list. You know, I totally agree. We won't have time to do all this stuff in 2025. No way, not a chance. But we probably, especially with new code and new policies, want to make sure we don't have things slip through the cracks. So maybe it's the RUEs. We need to, you know, whatever we need to revisit on RUEs seems like something that is stirring. This one that we have listed as education on and of development regulations, well, we're going to need that even more now with changes. So that seems like giving some thought to what that might look like. And what do we mean by that? What kind of education are we talking about for folks to understand current and the new regs that are coming down the pike? And then probably another one that relates somewhat closely, especially to the broader housing discussion, is housing in Southern Gateway and just thinking about what's going on over there. I mean, everything on this list is important, but those are the ones that I see as having a nexus to work that we're already committed to doing right now with middle housing. David, thoughts?
Just clarification question, because I can't quite remember. What's the time frame for conversations or the work around middle housing?
I think where we landed last time, I mean, they have to be, I think we thought that our work would go till about March.
So, okay.
Because then we got to start handing things off to council. That doesn't mean we're done, right? But I think we were gonna try to have something like a draft of this stuff. That's only, you know, 5 meetings.
It's pretty tight. An ordinance needs to be adopted and sendable to Commerce by June 15th.
By June 15th, okay.
And they need to bless it by June 30th. On July 1st, if that doesn't happen, we're subject to the model ordinance if a project walks in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that would happen, but we don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the way I see this is we're gonna make that deadline. If we can work in some talk of incentives, we do that, but maybe incentives are next then. But we should talk more about that with our full group here, like how much energy we want to put into incentives. I think there are some terrific ideas for incentives out there. We don't have to tackle all of them. We may want to just choose a few things to focus on, and maybe we could deliver that with our recommendations to council.
You know, perhaps we have a extra meeting to talk about incentives.
We may want that in January or something. It'd be hard to get an extra meeting in December.
Right.
But January could work. The one that Maddie sort of mentioned, you know, which one that I've also mentioned in the past is basically a density bonus for small scale residences, like cottage scale, where essentially we would in fact allow more units on a parcel if they were that scale, and that would be, you know, restricted by deed in perpetuity. So that's one. Maddie,
Yeah, unless we're ready to be working on the middle housing component parts that we would anticipate sending to council maybe by the end of March. If that works out to be roughly the right timeline, can I recommend that we tackle, if they're ready, the tree canopy report and the Parks and Rec update? I can't quite remember. It feels like those things have been kicked around for a while, and I'm not sure if that's just inviting them to our meeting, you know, our representative, to go over key elements that we should have top of mind as we move into that middle housing coding, or you know, what exactly is it feels like that would be useful information to know, that all the work that they've done, the good work that they've done. It would be nice for that to be top of mind as we head into those code conversations. And then we can check these two things off the list before we ever get into fiscal year 25. And then I also wanted to recommend that we just make the decision to say, hey, we are going to need every ounce of time we have to get the basic code recommendations to council by March, and that we should then signal to them, we're doing this because of the time restrictions, but we will immediately be spending the next 4 months working on incentives. You know, so that they know that our eyes are focused on that, which then would give us like, you know, later next fall, maybe to work on some of these other items. It's just a way to sort of tackle this list a little more easily. Just a thought.
what do people think?
I agree with that.
Okay, does that give you some?
Staff's fine with the last 2/3 of that. The problem with the pros plan and the tree, as it's written. The tree board, the Parks and Recs Advisory Board, the Climate Action Committee, the City Council, and every other commission and committee we have are fully tasked. We'll start with CAC. They are no longer temporary. We are going to continue that into 2025. They're going to hold a joint meeting with the Kenmore CIC on December 3rd. The tree board is working on the tree list, the desirable tree list or the prohibited tree list, depending on how you look at it. And then the tree diameters for either 1 or 2 ordinances. That's their task. If that tree item is to have somebody come here and talk about the tree report, and I forget the title, but that was done January to May, we can do that, but they can't take on new work. So that's not a candidate for now or early 2025. The pros plan, as it stands in the existing budget, was cut from somewhere around $300,000 to $30,000. The $30,000 in fiscal year 2025 addresses a single item. What city properties are there? What are they being used for? What can they be used for? That's a staff-driven amendment in 2025. Not between now and when you're done with middle housing. So the overall framework, middle housing, and then see the second part or the second 2/3 of the year, staff can accommodate. I guess the way to picture it is between now and Christmas, every hour is more than spoken for once.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, I mean, David can probably speak to this more, but I feel like if there were any, maybe we just need to read I didn't put these items on the list, so I don't know where the tree canopy report and post ideas came from here. And so it might be good to figure out who added those and then see what they had in mind. But I was trying to honor that some grouping of our commission put this list together, and I was just looking for a way to, you know, kind of break it up into manageable, logical parts. So maybe there's nothing to be done there except for us to read what they've published. And then pull a couple of them into an incentives conversation that we might have in late in spring or summer, and push the, the rest or some of the other ones until later in the year. I almost feel like the education on and of development regulations might be something that's really useful to be doing like in the summer when we're ideally maybe more complete on the incentive sides, so that we can actually develop education around that. But Mark, you might have some other ideas since, this is also intended to help support staff.
We're gonna try, right? We're gonna have a work plan for all of 2025 and try and achieve that and have the resources there. We know the meetings are standardized. There will be items on the meeting. There are many items not on this list, not in the budget, not associated that we have to do. Critical areas ordinance, shoreline master plan, finish the signs, subdivision ordinance, wireless ordinance. So we're going to prioritize, meet the mandates, the legislation, middle housing, the climate element, other items we can do with existing commissions and committees, so that those volunteer groups can continue to work. And then we have that third or fourth level of whatever is required to be done that we do with the city attorney and outside this setting. Many of those will come to you. The planning commission needs to make recommendations on certain things. Those go to city council, so you'll be aware of many of those, possibly even a public hearing. An example of that would be the shoreline master program from due in 2013 that was almost made it in 2019. Anyway, the last round. The question there becomes, when we dust that off, add an opportunity for new items for ecology, do we need to bring that to planning commission or straight back to city council? So there's plenty to do. But I like your concept of having an ambitious work plan focused on after middle housing.
David?
So I just wanted to.
I just want to correct the record. I'm not looking to have an ambitious work plan. I'm looking to do really good work on a few items. I don't know where this list came from, and so I want to be respectful. But I'm like, let's do a bang up job on middle housing, and get the word out to the community. And that feels like enough, because you're right. There are other things we're going to have to see that aren't even on this list. So again, I'm not sure where this list came from, but maybe somebody can shed some light.
It's largely a parking lot, not to interrupt you, David.
David, go ahead.
Yeah, so Mark, you just added to the list, by the way, that this list that we're discussing. And Maddie, yes, it was just those of us we're just brainstorming really on what are the possible work items for the future. And so it's just a good list. We started the conversation last meeting. What determine really ask, Mark posed the questions like what's next, and so we created the timeline that's on the board behind the guys there. But back to what you were saying, Maddie, I think it's really important that we do the work on middle housing, do it well. I think there's some questions around RUEs and the development question. I think that questions will come up that need to be addressed. Aspects of these of these items that are on the list will come up, and we'll probably want to address them. But I think as soon as we get, I think we just really need to concentrate on the middle housing right now, and then come back to this conversation maybe in January.
That's really helpful. So we were just we weren't suggesting this is our work plan for next year.
No.
You were just saying it's a collection of ideas. Oh, cool. Then so we need a work plan. I feel like we should tackle that in our next meeting, adopt a work plan for next year. And
that's our agenda for.
Perfect. Great.
Start the draft.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then have that conversation December 10th.
Perfect.
And since you asked where the list came from, for example, one of the items was something I mentioned, and it's not even really meant to be a planning commission item. I said it because we were being recorded, and I knew our council liaison was there, which was this last one about Perkins, and just observing that light rail is open now and nothing has been done to address any kind of traffic calming on Perkins in all the time I've lived in Lake Forest Park. And it shows. People are hauling up and down that road, especially up. The speeds are actually higher going up than they are coming down. So we're not the ones to do anything about that, actually. I don't think. I'm not sure if it goes to traffic engineer, like who deals with it, but I can tell you it's people use that more than they use 178. And that was the point. And
I don't know. Has there been counting? I live on 178th and I can tell you that it's a racetrack out here.
well, at least you have some traffic calming now. So
I live on 40th
I
and
would-
it's gotten worse. I can tell you
Yeah,
that.
I would say it's gotten worse throughout our whole community.
Yeah.
And yeah, with the traffic calming is at the school, it doesn't help us up on the what would that be, the west side of 178th. We get people blazing down and then braking right before they hit the cameras.
And traffic was predicted to get more substantial in Lake Forest Park just a few years ago, and that's what's happened.
Yep, exactly.
David, did you have another comment as your hand?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I keep doing that.
No problem. Okay, I think we can move on from that list. Say, do we have new business to discuss? Nothing on the list. Some announcements about planning commission vacancies and recruitment.
There's a little uncertainty, but the main item tonight is that we have a quorum tonight and some absences. And we have what's looking like Lois has stepped away from the planning commission and the climate policy advisory team, CPAC. I don't have an email, but that's what I'm told. And I haven't been directly informed. I haven't talked to Lois, but I believe as of tonight, she's stepping away. So if that's the case, the recruitment will be we'll send out more reminders to the community through the city clerk. We talked about it last Tuesday. And if my memory serves me correct, Melissa, you might also be moving at some point.
I am moving.
Sad face. I heard about that last meeting.
So we won't the kids and I won't be moving until probably like June of next year. But I probably need to step down before that. There's just a lot going on. But I'm available for the time being until you're able to find somebody else, just for quorum, if nothing else for quorum purposes. But
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Additional citizen comments, none. Agenda for next meeting, regular meeting, December 10th. Sounds like work plan start and then continuing with our consultants.
The four bulleted items, primarily gap analysis to begin, so that we can fill your Christmas holiday with learning
With
code.
gaps.
What's in the code? Yep.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn early.
I motion to adjourn early.
Sorry.
Second.
Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank
I was
you all.
laughing earlier, Yanni, because I was thinking, Melissa, we're going to miss you very much. But I was thinking, I made a comment when you weren't there last week that I would stay on until there was a replacement. But now I feel like I'm going to be on planning commission for the rest of my life. Nobody else gets to leave before me.
well, you've been here for this year 7, isn't it? Or is it year?
Yeah, so my term was over in February and the mayor asked me to stay on through the comp planning. And I was like, oh, I could do that. And then I said, oh, well, but if there's somebody else in the community who can serve, but I didn't want to leave the seat vacant. And then before then you left and now it sounds like Lois is leaving. So I'm like, okay, now I'm third in line. Nobody else has permission to leave before my place is filled.
At this moment,
I'm
Matt,
watching.
you're in the 2-term plus category, David, and we're aiming towards March for reappointments in all committees and so forth. And David's approaching the end of his 2nd term and could be going into the 2+ category. So, but between now and March.
David, you're not allowed until I'm replaced. Does that mean you need somebody on planning commission to join the climate, maybe?
We
The
have
climate
2
group?
alternates, and the only uncertainty today is I haven't received an official resignation, and I would
Okay.
like writing. So tomorrow, the option is to talk to the 2 CPAT alternates, see what their plans are, see what their appetite for becoming a full member. If they both want to or neither want to, and then go from there.
Great. Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks a lot.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.